Our system treats very wealthy older individuals as if they are very poor.
Welcome. First of all, what is your position on whether Australia's current tax breaks on superannuation are too generous for the times?
I think they are too generous. What's happened over the past few years is that we've reined in a lot of the superannuation tax breaks. We used to let people contribute as much as they want at a very low tax rate. We used to tax very large balances at low rates. We've fixed some of those problems, but we still have a big problem at the top end. Super is taxed about right for the average person, but it's undertaxed for people with very large balances.
Does that mean that the superannuation system itself has morphed into something other than what it was designed for?
I think that's exactly what happened. Superannuation was designed for providing retirement income for people so that people could have a comfortable retirement. What does a comfortable retirement entail? It's going to be different for different people, but $100,000, $200,000, something that might be 80% of what you earned when you were working. And we've got people amassing now tens of millions of dollars in superannuation, which will generate millions of dollars of annual income for them. That's well beyond what we think is reasonably required for retirement.
Is there a place for assets such as houses and farms in superannuation funds?
That's a really interesting question. My view on that is no. I think people can disagree about that, but that's not what superannuation was set up for. Superannuation was set up, again, to provide incomes in retirement for people. It wasn't set up to be a business vehicle where you have multiple property holdings or farms or even actual businesses run through them. And the only reason people are doing that is to avoid tax.
And so with the proposed change now on the agenda, could the Treasurer be targeting the holding of assets in self-managed super funds without explicitly saying so?
I think that is what is happening. So there's two problems that arise with self-managed super funds. One problem is that people, let's just take the example of somebody who's holding multiple investment properties inside of a self-managed super fund. The superannuation is set up to tax those things once they are sold, but people aren't actually selling them. What they're doing is when they die, those assets pass on to their children and they're not sold and there's no tax paid on them. So that's really avoiding any kind of tax net that normally would apply in this place. So I think that is one of the things that is being targeted. So for regular kind of superannuation, the sort that most of your listeners would have, where you're in a superannuation fund and you're getting a mix of income, this is going to change the tax rate on those very high balances from 15% to 30%. That's still quite generous relative to the 47% top marginal tax rate that people would pay. And so it's also taking away that concession. So it's trying to solve those two problems.
Do you think the government's proposed change will indeed begin to redress the intergenerational inequities in the way that the tax system operates?
I think the government needs to go beyond this. I think this is a really important first step. Labor ran on a platform of addressing this issue. I think for those of us who have aspirations for broader tax reform, which Australia is desperately in need of, that it's really important that this first step go through, and then we can talk about some of the other things that might be needed.
Such as?
Better taxation of housing. So at the moment we tax transfers of houses. We use stamp duty if you sell or buy a house. That's a bad thing to tax because we actually want people to buy and sell houses, but we don't tax the growth in the asset value of houses. And the best way to do that would be a land tax. So a switch between stamp duty and replacing that with a broad-based property tax that would include all property. I think the other thing we really need to look at is that our system treats very wealthy older individuals as if they are very poor. So we give the age pension to people who have millions of dollars of assets. We treat them as if they have no income. We provide age care to people without asking them to contribute to it. I do think we need to look at putting all of people's assets, including the family home, into the age pension means test and into the means test for age care. Now, those will not be very popular policies, but they are really the policies that we need to address intergenerational inequity.
The principle of taxing unrealised gains, as the government's proposed super tax change will, is extremely unusual in OECD countries. What is your view on whether that is fair, just, and a big change in the way that Australia's tax system operates?
That's an interesting question. I have kind of two initial thoughts about it. One is that optimal tax theory, I won't get too geeky as an academic, but the optimal tax theory actually says that unrealized gains is the right way to tax capital. And the reason we don't do it in the rest of the system is we just find it overly complicated. The second thing I would say is we do actually tax unrealized gains in part of our system. Every year you pay council rates, and your council rate bill goes up as the value of your asset goes up, even though you haven't sold the asset. So we actually have taxation of unrealized gains in our system. And if we had appropriate property taxation that was broad-based, we would also be taxing unrealized gains.
Okay, but is it fair that public officials in defined benefit schemes with balances above $3 million would be allowed to indeed defer those tax payments until their retirement?
So I think what would be fair is to, and this is one of the ways that I would modify Labor's proposal, is that, first I should also say that the unrealized gains aspect of this is actually very important for two reasons. One is that for people who have superannuation in the big funds, those big funds are not actually able to calculate at an individual level the realized capital gains that are assigned to an individual, because the fund has money that's pooled across all individuals, but they can easily calculate unrealized gains. So for the big funds, unrealized gains is better. The second reason you need to go after unrealized gains is for the example I gave earlier of people who have multiple property holdings in a self-managed super fund. They want to pass that on to people in the next generation, and they're not going to pay any tax on it because the value is never realized, the gain is never realized. What would be fair and what would be a good modification is to give everybody the option, everybody who's covered by this new tax on balances above 3 million, the option of paying tax on the unrealized gains or the option of not paying tax on the unrealized gains. And again, that's very much what we do with council rates. If you're a pensioner, you don't have a lot of liquid assets, and you get your rates bill, you call the council and you say, look, I don't have any money to pay this. They say, that's fine. We'll just keep track of what you owe us. We'll index it by inflation. And when your house is transferred or sold, we'll then take the tax liability that you owe. So we could give that to everybody in the system. We could say, we're going to tax the unrealized gains. You can pay it now, or we'll keep track of it and we'll charge you when the property is either transferred or sold.
If the government is indeed embarking on wider reform of the tax system, what does the conversation that we're having, the conversation about this one proposed super tax change, show about how difficult a process it is likely to be?
Whenever you do tax reform, you create winners and losers. Even if the winners are a large group of people and the losers are a small group of people, the losers are often very squeaky. And as we've seen in this debate, even though this is affecting, at least initially, probably only about 100,000 people, that has produced a lot of very vociferous debate about the issue. So I think we need to, first of all, have a conversation about what are the problems that we're trying to address. And the real big problems are growing wealth inequality, a system that treats a lot of wealthy people as if they're very poor, low productivity and low economic growth, which is stifling wages for working people, housing affordability. These are the problems that we need to address. I think once we sit down and say, okay, let's solve these problems, tax reform for me is changing the mix of taxation. If you do a few things at one time, sometimes you can actually make it so that although lots of people are losing a little bit, lots of people are also gaining in other ways. So that would be the kind of package I'd be looking for from a government that wanted to do big tax reform. There's an important thing here about tax reform, about the last thing you said too, which is that if Labor falters in getting this proposal through, then we have no chance for future further tax reform. And so I think it's actually important that this go through, perhaps with some modifications of the type I suggested. But for anybody who's kind of ambitious about tax reform, this is actually strategically sort of important that this happen.
Robert Breunig, great to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you.